Most businesses chase growth, but not all growth is created equal. So how do you scale without sacrificing your future, your freedom, or your finances? Now, today's guest is Joe Mathews. He's the author of The Ultimate Guide to Responsible Franchising, and he's helped brands and entrepreneurs grow smarter for nearly 40 years. Now, in this episode, we're going to unpack how to scale with intention. So whether you're new to business or whether you're in franchising, whether you're buying a franchising or expanding your concept, you're going to find out ways on how to grow the right way.
Welcome to Fortify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Welcome back to Fortify Live, where we break down what it takes to really grow a business. Now, our guest today is Joe Mathews. You can connect with him on LinkedIn. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find him at LinkedIn and online at Franchise Performance Group. Joe, welcome to Fortify Live.
So happy to be here.
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad we got set up in the green room, and we talked a little bit about today about what are we going to talk about? Well, you've got such a broad experience. So tell our listeners a little bit about your background and then how you became involved in franchising.
I became involved in franchising. I'll answer that one first. The same way any career professional who's involved in franchising for more than 20 years got involved in franchising. We all got in by accident.
Yep.
We stumbled into it. We didn't know what it was. It grabbed our attention, and then we kind of dedicated our lives to it because it was a worthy place to put time, money, and energy. My background, I just kind of grew up in kind of a poor blue collar neighborhood in West Haven, Connecticut. And when I went to college, my dad was the first college educated guy in our neighborhood and our family. When I went to school for fine arts. I wanted to be an artist. And, artists see the world a particular way. And I find as a business strategist, you got to know how you see the world because it influences strategy. It influences every decision, every conversation you're in. And I naturally kind of see the world as an artist. In other words, and I find business people are reductionists. And I think that's one of the things that's helped me is I'm not a reductionist. In other words, a reductionist would see the Sistine Chapel and say, you know what, the Sistine Chapel is nothing more than the sum total of a lot of brushstrokes, right? And that's how we solve problems in business, right? We reduce it down to its most common elements, and we solve for the common elements, and it becomes additive, right? And then we build back up. We try to solve the problem. Artists would say this would take more of a Gestalt kind of psychologist approach to business. Say the whole is actually different than the sum of the parts. It should be bigger and grander, especially on a brand level, right? So the brand is different than the individual stakeholders. It should be its own thing. The Sistine Chapel stands as its own thing, separate and distinct even from Michelangelo, right? People build relationships with it on their own level. So that's kind of what I bring into business and what I kind of brought into franchising. I came in looking at business and looking at the world very differently than most people. And that helped me stand out and helped me succeed.
Well, I know for me, I started my first business at 15 years old and then grew multiple companies up. I invented products in childcare, automotive, healthcare, and sporting goods. And so I had a lot of experience in business. And then now, I spend my time speaking and training all over the globe on business growth and strategy. And I've always found that there's four basic buckets, right? You've got the operational bucket, which covers leadership and the team. You got the finance bucket, which is, the accounting, looking in the rearview mirror, and the finance, looking in the out the windshield. Then you've got marketing, which is creating opportunities. And then you've got sales, which are actually building the opportunities. So when you think about strategy and the brands that you work with now, just a little bit background. So we've got listeners that are entrepreneurs, franchisors, franchisees, multi-unit owners. If you're new to franchising, certainly, there's ways we can share more, but today's episode is really about scaling, right? So they've got a business. So whether you're a solopreneur or you're in a franchise brand or you're a franchisee, how do you scale? So I'm just curious because that's one of the things that you've got a lot of experience in. What are some of the challenges you see when people are trying to scale?
Yeah, very good question. I'm going to take it from the business startup, right? There's always a point where the entrepreneur can no longer make it just on the force of personality of the entrepreneur, right?
Right.
Like starting, if you started businesses, I started businesses. It's not easy, right? And it's it takes a Herculean effort of the entrepreneur to get a business stable, successful, and to the point where it's going to survive, right? But then they'll get to a point if the business grows that no longer works, right? What got you from A to B is not going to get you from B to C. And that's when the entrepreneur or the founder really needs to look at themselves and say, what did I actually do well, right? And what makes this business work, and how do I systematize and codify the heck out of it? Because it's the time where if you're going to scale it, it's got to be more about processes and systems and replication than it is about force of personality. And it's also going to be about giving up control, right? If you think about, a lot of times, I think there's a little bit of a mind psych that entrepreneurs do on themselves here, right? If you think about a really good entrepreneur, don't they almost like resist organization, resist corporation, right? Show me somebody who's a really good entrepreneur, and I'm going to probably show you somebody who's a pretty bad employee, right?
Yeah, I'm educably unemployable. Like if I had to, other than they can hire me to speak and train and coach and consult and strategize, but as an employee, yeah, I don't think I would make it through very well.
So there's a point in the business life cycle where the entrepreneur has to build that which they probably despise, which is the corporation, right?
Yep.
At least the first time, maybe entrepreneur, the first time scaling, it gets easier as you do it because you've resolved that issue with yourself. A lot of times entrepreneurs don't even know they have that. So I think scaling a lot of times is an inside out job from the entrepreneur. They get to that business inflection point. They got to make sure that that's what they want to do. And they've got to give up and relinquish a lot of control. And the business becomes less about them, more about process, systems, and others. And that's a big, I say big point of personal growth, I think, on behalf of the entrepreneur. And a lot of it resist it and don't get past that. So they choke the business off. Now, they could still be wildly successful and very profitable, but it isn't what it could be.
No, I would agree. When I look at what I've done to scale, I didn't know what I didn't know. Like when I started as an entrepreneur, I mean, people are strong in one of three areas, right? They're either good at delivering the product or service, so they're a practitioner.
Yes.
Or they're good at marketing and sales, which means they understand how to create the opportunity to sell it. Or they're good at leading people. And when it comes to business, especially in franchising, you're buying a franchise because you're trying to systematize everything. And as an entrepreneur, when you're trying to scale, whether you're a franchise brand or not, you need the systems. I know for me, Joe, my first product that I invented was called pedestal bicycle storage rack. It was a bicycle rack oak that went between the floor and the ceiling, that sandwiched in between the floor and the ceiling, and would store up to 4 bicycles.
Nice.
And it sold for $200. And when I first came up with the idea, Joe, people told me no one would buy it. They said, you can buy a hook for 99 cents. Why would they spend $200 on this oak furniture bicycle rack? And I thought, well, I've got two $10,000 racing bicycles because I was a pro cyclist back then. I'm not going to leave them out on my porch, right? They were works of art. They're Italian custom made, bicycles. And so I decided I'd create this product. So I had a need, but I didn't understand. I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And that was the biggest thing and I think that's what I do this show today is because, you can either learn from your own experience or other people's experience, right? And so the reason people hire speakers, coaches, and strategists like you and I is because they're trying to shortcut the experience. Well, it's the same thing with a franchise brand. As an entrepreneur, and I just got done, I keynoted the Canadian Franchise Association. I also spoke at the International Franchise Association in February. And so, what the thing about franchising, what's appealing to me is they've already made the mistakes, so you don't have to. And the biggest thing in franchise is the franchisor just wants the franchisees to follow the systems. And the franchisee says, hey, why aren't you doing more to drive business into my organization? So franchising for an entrepreneur is a great way. But one thing I've seen, probably the biggest myth is as a franchise owner, franchisee, also known as a Z versus a ZOR, they have to follow the system. And sometimes they have a business owner in a franchise that's too entrepreneurial and they try to change the system, or they trying to be creative or innovative instead of just working the system. And I know that's always a challenge. I spoke for one healthcare company and a nutrition company, and from the audience, because you never know what they're going to say from stage. And the audience member said, well, why can't I sell lottery tickets in my store? I'm having a lot of foot traffic. It'd be easy to make some extra money, impulse purchase, point of purchase at the counter. And I said, well, the reason you can't, for many reasons, not for compliant, of course, but is because if they buy lottery tickets from your store, but then they enter another state or city and that person doesn't offer lottery tickets, they're going to think it's the brand's problem, not your problem. So there's a lot to unpack in what I've said. But so you got into franchising. Tell me a little bit about who's your ideal client for Franchise Performance Group and what services do you offer? Now, this isn't an infomercial, but it's my show and I want to know.
Okay. Yeah. Our core business is helping good entrepreneurs and valuable franchise opportunities find each other. Right. So, so it starts on the brand level. So who would be a good client for us is somebody that offers a very valuable business opportunity. And that means something very specific to me. So that means it's profitable, it's replicable, it's defensible, so it's not going to commoditize. And when competitive threats come, they can stake a position. It's differentiated in the marketplace, and then it has long-term sustainability. So it's not a flash in the pan, right? So I like to see things that are going to be around 5, 10, 15, 20 years and hopefully create multi-generational wealth. So that's what that looks like to me. Now, my clients are the brands,
right?
And we help them articulate their brand story as an investment opportunity. So we don't help them find customers; we help them find investment dollars and investors, right? So we help them articulate their brand story, and then so that would be things like website design, collateral material. We design their recruitment processes and content the investors would see along the lines. A typical businessman will take about 90 to 120 days to investigate a business before they make a decision. So there's a particular buyer journey. There's particular questions they ask along the way. And there's particular content they might want to see on day 90 that they have no interest in seeing on day 30, right? So it's just understanding the buyer journey and having collateral or explainer videos or help educate them on making sure from their perspective it's the right business for them. We're big on mutual fit.
That makes so much sense.
And so basically we offer the two services. So one I'll call lead generation, but it's digital marketing, drive traffic to the website, articulating the brand story, and then layering out the collateral and lead nurturing content so they're ready to have a conversation. And then we also have outsourced franchisee recruiters that know how to take interest from the first call from, maybe I want to start a business someday, to signing agreements on behalf of the franchisor. So we could do just lead generation, or we could take it from lead generation right to contract signing. So that's our core business.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
We work with anywhere from 10 to 15 clients at any point.
Yeah, I think it's, there's always that sweet spot in franchise. As there's a franchisor who starts out, they just started, they're building their systems, and they get maybe 25 units, probably under 50. And then there's that next group when they get to 100. And just like you said in the opening of the episode today, that the thinking and the skill set of an entrepreneur that started the business to get it to 25 or even 50 units probably isn't going to be the same person running it at 100 units. Now, they still can be the founder. Maybe they're the chairman or the CEO, but they're not the person running it, right? And then, of course, then you go from 100 units to 500, and then there's brands that have thousands of units around the globe, of course. And so, thinking back of your history and the lessons you've learned, what are some of the top challenges that you've seen that franchisors have when they're trying to grow?
So first and foremost would be I think franchising is maybe the only industry people get into when they have no idea the size of the available market or what the demand is. They pony up hundreds of thousands of dollars and thinking they're all unicorns, that somehow just because they've entered the market as a franchise opportunity, they have all those baked in buyers. There's a huge, so I would say mistake number one is understanding there's a huge disequilibrium between buyers and sellers in franchising. 1 to 2 million people will express interest in a particular brand a year. Only 15,000 or so actually invest. Yet there's 4,000, depending who you believe, as many as 7,000 franchisors vying each year for only 15,000 buyers. So you're not even sustainable at a franchisor probably unless you have 25 or 40 units open. So if you put it in perspective, it's like a 20 to 30 year break even at its current state.
Yep.
Yet 250 to 350 new franchisors enter the market every single year and make those hundreds of thousands of dollars investment and never monetize. So that's mistake number one. Okay. Mistake number two would be there's a cottage industry of attorneys and consultants that will always tell them they're the unicorn, even though they don't really have a valuable business. But for 250 grand, they'll show them how, right?
Right.
So and then produce something that just ripped off a word processor, right? It's sad. I'm in the business of picking up that, right? And trying to, weave gold out of straw, right? So that's number one. They don't understand the market. Number two is how they price themselves. So if somebody's new to franchising, they don't have the track record, right? They probably don't provide the value, but they price themselves like they're a large franchise organization in royalty structure and franchise fee revenue, yet they're higher risk. So Econ 101 would say, look, if you've got fewer buyers, what's that do to in the high supply? What does that do to price?
Right.
Should go down, right? Not in franchising. Investment goes up every year. And if they're not producing the consistent returns, it's an investment product. They don't look at their business model as an investment product. If you don't have the defensibility or you don't have the predictability of earnings, that means you're higher risk. Well, if you're higher risk, you should produce higher returns. Except they produce lower returns because they're the small guy or the new guy. So they have higher risk, higher cost, lower returns, and they think it's marketable. It's insanity because they don't think economics 101 applies to business opportunity, right? And then third might be if they do get traction, it's often the franchisor, they're graduating people from their corporate units and then moving them over
right
to franchising. It's not like they're franchise professionals, right? Now that works for a period of time, but everybody's pulling double duty and it's a lot of friends, it's a lot of family. It could be golf buddies. I remember I was in a business meeting once and the daughter of the founder got mad at her dad, cried, screamed, left the room crying. And the question was asked to me, did she just run out of the room as the vice president of marketing or the precocious daughter of an overbearing father?
I think I know who you're talking about, but I won't say because I think I know that father-daughter relationship. Either that or it's manifested itself. But yeah, you're right. It's because they get incestuous, right? They hire people from internally. Right. They elevate them to jobs that they don't have the skill sets for or the education for, and then they wonder why they don't have success, right?
And that will create a breakdown. And then most people are pulling double duty, right? They don't have one job, they got two jobs, they got three jobs. So that will work, again, force of personality to about maybe 25, maybe 40 franchisees. Then they got to build infrastructure. And usually they're not cash flow positive or they're starting to make a little bit of money, but the market is going to require them to put $500,000, $1 million into payroll. And they resist. Either A, they don't have it, right?
Right.
Or B, they resist it. And that creates, eventually a business will always become something somebody can run, right?
Well, that's the point. You're not trying to buy a minimum wage job, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They'll either choke off growth or minimize it. to something that they can eventually control. But lost opportunity. A lot of franchisors think it's $250,000 to get going, and the franchise, those upfront fees will sustain the organization or fund development of the organization. It doesn't. It's unless somebody's walking in with $1 to $2 million war chest, then they're already undercapitalized. And the funny thing is, they do it anyway, right?
Yep.
So and yet they would never tell a franchisee to do that. Never go into business undercapitalized. Yet they'll do it on the franchisor side, and assuming that if they act like MacGyver, the old MacGyver show.
Yep.
I don't have the money. I'll just do it out of bubble gum, paper clips, and duct tape. That I'll eventually create a valuable brand. It just doesn't work.
I
Not
agree.
in this hyper competitive market. You've got to look, feel, and act bigger than you are, and then grow into your capacity. That's the market dynamics today.
Well, I agree with that so much. I remember when I was building my sporting goods up, I started a garage operation. After the first year, I had $1 million in sales, and I was a new business owner. And so I went to my controller, my
That's a hell of a garage.
Yeah. So I went to my controller, or it was my bookkeeper at the time. It wasn't a controller. I don't even think I knew what that word was back then. But I went to my bookkeeper with a shoebox full of receipts and things, and said, "I'm a millionaire." And she said, "Hold on there, Skippy. Let me get back to you." And she said, "You sold $1 million. You're $150,000 in debt, and you took home $16,000." And I didn't understand revenue, cost of goods, inventory turns, insurance. I didn't understand balance sheet, assets, liability, equity. I didn't understand profit and loss I didn't understand a chart of accounts. And here I am running, here I am selling $1 million. And it's surprisingly how many because I speak and train all over the world, and I work with franchise brands. I mystery shop ahead of time. And unfortunately, I spoke last week in Nashville. And I sat at the table at breakfast with a couple new franchisees, and I said, "How long you've had your franchise?" And they said, "Well, I'm in for 2 weeks, and she's been in for 3 months." They just had opened, right? This is for a home healthcare franchise. And so I asked them, I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about your background." And she said, "Well, my husband was in the military, and we were just looking for a business to buy. So we're really not so no clue on how to actually scale and run. But here they are. They've invested their life savings. And they're going to make it because they're really open-minded. They're coachable. They're critical thinkers. But I'm glad that, and she said to me, she said, "Well, we were going to start our own business, but then we found about franchising, and the franchisees that I've got a pleasure over the last 34 years in franchising to meet, the ones that are successful really are coachable. They're open-minded. They read books. They go to seminars. They network with their core. They follow the system, because I found it's, a lot of times they'll say, well, our territory's bad, or we've got too much competition, or, they opened up a competitor across the street. And I always tell them, focus on what you can control, which is your attitude, your allocation of time, and your actions. I said,
right.
you don't have control over those competitors, but there's plenty of people, as long as you have a good product, and the product, I always tell people, even as a business incubator for my other agency, I tell them, look, the product's 5%. The 95% is positioning and selling and the customer experience. Like, there's a lot of great restaurants that go out of business, not because the food wasn't any good, or there's a lot of great businesses that fail. Same with franchising, as you know, and I've seen in our careers, there's brands that go out of business that you just kind of think, wow, that was a really good product, but they didn't know how to grow it. And that brings me to the next question. So you're working on this new book. It's going to be coming out this year, hopefully, The Ultimate Guide to Responsible Franchising. So tell our listeners a little bit about what is that? Who's the ideal reader for that book, and what can they hope to gain from it?
Great question. Yeah, so it's on the streets now. Came out a couple months ago. Published by Wiley.
Let me.
So it's available on Amazon. But
let me put a sound effect in there. Okay, so I'll do more research ahead of time before you get to guess it. This is live, everybody. So we're not editing this out. This is live, Joe. All right, so tell me, they can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, get it on Amazon.
All right, so go to Amazon right now, everybody. Get the book by Joe Mathews. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Responsible Franchising. I'll make sure we put a link in the show notes for this. So who's the ideal listener? What can they hope to gain from the book?
It's primarily for people looking to do a startup.
Gotcha.
All right, so they want to start a business. And the premise of the book is that it's all about as far as finding the right franchise is about fit. So my wife and I are both in franchising, as some of my children are. And, if we go to like a pickleball or cocktail event, the question is always, they find out we're in franchising. It's always what's hot, what's new.
Right.
And I would say the two worst questions you could ever ask about what's hot, what's new. Because here's how I hear it. What is no track record? What's unsustainable, right? We don't know, has no long-term history, has potentially no long-term sustainability, and has no proof of concept. That's where I want to put my money, right? So, so I hate those questions. It's more about what's the right business. And sometimes I always ask people, hey, what's the best business to get into? And I was going to say, what's the best career to get into?
Right, exactly.
I have a brother who's an actuary. He does great. Talk about the last possible thing I should ever do for a living would be actuarial science, right?
Sorry, I had to hit the laugh track on that. Yeah. I always tell people, Joe, if they're asking the wrong question, the answer doesn't matter, right? But it's interesting how they ask the wrong question. That's not the right question, right?
It's just the wrong question, right? So for me, it's about fit. And the fit means 3 or 4 different things, right? Yeah, first, it's an inside out job. You got to take an inventory of what can you count on yourself for, right? So what are you particularly good at? I call your particular brand of genius. I worked with a behavior profile who did behavior profile for 50, 60 years. And he said, Joe, out of all those years, I could distill my career down to 2 things. Everybody, which is almost 1 million people that I profiled, operates at a genius level at something. And he said, the second thing I can tell you is those same exact people are so incompetent at other things, they're not even worthy of being trained. So those same people that are genius are also incompetent. And I found that to be true, right? So I think the first thing is what's your particular brand of genius and how would that play out in a business? So, so your particular brand of genius will help you find some businesses and eliminate others, right? Second would be the business itself, right? So what are the basic fundamentals of a business? Because you don't really have a lot of control over that. Right. So a good business is a good business, means it's unique, it's profitable, it's sustainable for the long haul. It's got a track record. It's replicable. It's defensible. And I have some criteria to measure it against. But one thing I think I did, which was unique, which I have not seen enough content for, is how do you know you're doing business with a reputable franchisor? And I will tell you, I spent a career growing franchisors into failure. So one concept I work with, we brought him up to 500 units in about a 7-year period. It was a frozen dessert self-serve yogurt franchise, had great unit level economics. Now we all knew, because yogurt back in the 80s got commoditized, right? And then like the TCBYs of the world, they kind of shuddered, right? So we knew that we had a runway and that it was going to get commoditized, but this franchisor thought about it the right way. He educated all the investors and franchisees saying, look, we're not trying to build a yogurt brand. We're trying to build a frozen dessert brand. Yogurt's a commodity. It'll have its run, but people eat frozen desserts outside the house, always have, always will. We want to ride the yogurt curve to build a powerful brand. And then we'll alter the menu as we need to. And I said, okay, that is actually the right strategy and that will work. And their branding was off the hook, just played elbows over the rim as far as branding and systems and processes. When it came time to pivot and redesign the menu, he froze, pardon the pun, and he tanked the brand. Unit level sales went from $750,000, which is high for a dessert brand. Usually they do about $500,000, down to $350,000.
Wow.
At the same time, we increased distribution from 25 units to 500. So knowing what I know now, I probably would have steered them away from that particular brand, because knowing what I know now, it was a weak CEO. He never was going to do what's necessary to pivot. And he tanked tens of millions of dollars in investor money. So what looked like a great opportunity at the time, on paper, turned out to be just a miserable failure. So I show people the telltale signs of what to look for in a franchisor that may look shiny today, but is a disaster waiting to happen tomorrow. And I don't think enough is written on that. So I lay out the life cycle of a franchisor and the different inflection points and what the franchisors need to do to navigate at the different inflection points to continue the brand thrust. And a lot of them can do it and a lot don't. And then it's that a franchisee can't defy gravity long. They're going to go the way of the brand. And a lot of times the franchisee, look, they don't have control over the CEO. If the CEO makes enough bad decisions, it can hurt the brand, which will hurt their investment.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I've had the opportunity to interview hundreds of CEOs for this show, as well as inside and outside franchising. And the ones that I've found that are the most successful, the ones that really grow, they really have a great relationship and open two-way communications with their franchisees. They lead the company by all means, but they do have the franchise advisory council. They do have feedback loops. They do listen, but they don't necessarily change everything. You know, I had Charles Watson on my show from Tropical Smoothie.
Oh, he's fantastic. Yeah. I know Charles well.
Yeah. So I had Charles. I got him on my show, and then I was able to keynote at his conference. So I was honored to come in and speak to his group. But one of the things that he did, which I thought was so great, is he came out. I think I was the opening keynote speaker.
Tropical Smoothie.
Tropical Smoothie. Yeah. He came out, and I was supposed to. Did I say Tropical Smoothie? I thought I did, but I came out at. I was supposed to go on at 9:30. He came on at 8:30. He just walked out in front of the whole general session, sat the chair down, and just said, "Let's have a conversation." And so he had franchisees saying, "Well, are we going to offer salads? Are we going to offer keto? Or can we have ice cream?" And he just really authentically communicated with the franchisees. And a lot of times he just said, nope, we're not going to do that. We try. Like, he wasn't trying to just please them. He was really authentic in his communication and how he built it, which is one of the reasons why I think that brand's been so successful, because of how he's leading it with that open communication. And of course, there's other CEOs that have done the same thing. But then I've had CEOs where, in the green room, I'll ask them, well, tell me what your goals are. And they're like, I'm at 25 units. I want to get to 100 and flip it. And then I'm out. I'm like, oh man, this is probably not going to be the best episode. I probably need to, maybe shelf this episode, because I don't want, that's the wrong mindset. I mean,
yeah, we call that franchising as fast as you can.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work.
No, and it's not sustainable. And then, later he's like, well, strategically, a lot about franchising. We'd love to have you on the strategic board. I'm like, I don't want my name associated with it, because, I've got a reputation too. And I'm not saying I'm a magic bullet, but, I've helped a lot of brands grow and scale. And I don't want someone that knows the background of that brand, or he would reveal it, because it gets revealed. And I know it's happened on the other side. Now, that's a small unit, but I've worked with a big sandwich company that I won't name, that some way you might say train station. You can kind of figure out who it was. But I worked with this huge company, and their franchisees were upset because they oversold the territories. They forced them through supply chains. They made them use food that by the time it was delivered, it was spoiled, and they couldn't go to the grocery stores. They had preferred vendors it was just so many things that were wrong. And they were forcing certain promotions system wide that they lost 76 on every sandwich. So every sandwich that they sold, they lost 76 cents. Now, this was years ago. Yeah. I think they've gone through some leadership changes and they've changed it. But that's just an example of how leadership, they take a great brand and they go through, like you said, that life cycle of the business to where it's on every corner. But the franchisees were upset. I can't say pissed off. It is my show. I can say what I want. But then the problem was they couldn't sell their franchise unless it was to somebody that was already in the franchise brand. So they couldn't sell it to a new. So there was all these restrictions. And I just felt, because I knew a lot of their franchisees, and I just felt like these guys are hardworking. They're owner operators. They're in their stores. They open, they close, they hire, they fire, they do all the work, but they're really grinding just to make a living versus, the ones that are really growing. So I've seen both sides. I still am a big advocate for franchising, but they need to all go read your book, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't tell you this. My first job out of school in 1985 was with a small regional sandwich company of 375 units. And I was the second member on their franchise development team, which was Subway, right?
Well, fantastic.
So I was there when they were in 16 states, nothing international. And that's how I cut my teeth in franchising. That was, I said we all got into it by accident, right?
Right. Well, that's what everyone says when I ask them.
Right. Yeah. Kind of into franchising. But that's a classic story of there's not alignment of interests between Subway and the franchisee. They don't give them protected territories. So if I'm a Subway franchisee and I'm doing $1 million in sales, I'm not safe. The parent company would put another franchise on my border, and I might drive me down to 750, which when anybody owns a business does, when you lose sales, you're exponentially losing cash flow.
Right.
Right. So they take a huge hit, not just in cash flow, but equity. Right. And then they got another franchisee doing 750. So aggregate in the trade area, they might do $1.5 million. That benefits the franchisor. Okay. But at the expense of the franchisees. Right. So that's a win-lose. Yeah. And Subway was able to be very successful, kind of navigating a win-lose situation. I don't think that can happen today.
Yeah.
I think the market's smarter. I think the investors are smarter and wouldn't sign that agreement today, knowing how it gets implemented.
And this is all public knowledge, and just for the purposes of those this is recorded, this is for information and educational purposes only. This is not an offer to buy or sell any franchise. All right. So I want to put the little disclaimer in there. All right. So what closing thoughts, other than, they should check you out on LinkedIn, go to franchiseperformancegroup.com, go to Amazon, and get your book. What closing thoughts would you have for our listeners today?
I'll just talk to people looking to start a business. Every year they publish how many people want to start a business a year. It's always somewhere around 75% of people hope to start a business someday. Every year, about 11% of Americans are self-employed, right? So a lot of people have a hope, but they don't have an intention. I'll leave this with you. It's success is not an outside job. I hear a story, like when I'm working with franchise buyers, they tell me, well, if it's the right time or if I find the right business, well, that's all going on out there. You don't have control of the timing. You don't have control of a lot of things, but that's not what makes you succeed. Success is an inside out job. And if you align yourself with the right business and your skill sets, same way no job made you successful, no business will make you successful. And for anybody who has kids, what's the right time to have a kid, right? Eventually, we all throw up our hands and say, screw it. The neighborhood's never going to be safe enough. The school systems are never going to be any better. The house is never going to get any bigger. You just stick a flag in the ground and say, I'm going to have my first kid now, for those that had some intention. And then you find a way to make it work. And if you start a business, that's what it'll look like. You say now's the right time. You find a business with good fundamentals. You align your skills to opportunity. And the rest is going to work every day to make yourself right.
Well, I sure appreciate you being on the show today, Joe.
Thank you for it. It was so nice to be invited. And thank you to your listenership.
All right, everybody. So thanks for tuning in to Fortify Live. This is where we are all about accelerating your business growth. Until next time, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep fortifying your success.
Thank you for tuning in to Fortify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing. Thank you for tuning in to Fortify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.